probably the most crucial part of any quick sketch is to decide, what am I going to leave out? A quick sketch, by definition, really tells us that it's not going to include everything. It's not going to be detailed. But how do we juggle the simplification of our scene? How do we decide what we need to draw and how we should draw it? Let me give you my way of approaching a quick sketch scenario with this lovely little arched bridge over a walkway in an English grand estate somewhere. What to leave out, what to keep in. The way I start is I look at the scene and I just give it a quick look, and that's important because it's quick. Because what I'm trying to do is get a feel for visually what jumps at you. As an overall scene, what is it that we actually see when we glance at this scene above all the things that we might see? And if you're not sure what I mean, perhaps if I give you my answer, my personal answer for this scene, it will help you work that out. What we see, I think, is the silhouette of the light against the dark. We have a very light value in the stonework of the bridge and the garden in bits and pieces and the decorations, and the darker values behind. Now, behind is primarily the darker trees in the background, but it's also the darker framing within the arch, where with this 1 point perspective, it's actually narrower at the far end because the far end's further away than the nearer end, and therefore it looks as though the sides come in a bit, plus what we see through there. So that's what I want to be the, if you like, visually dominant thing in my drawing at the end. The other thing that, though, really helps that to happen is, I think, the contrast between some really straight, smooth lines and edges and values, lights and darks, and some ragged ones. So with the architecture, and particularly with some of the shades that the architecture is, shadows the architecture is cast in, create some long, straight, smooth geometric shapes that are fairly clearly outlined. And I'm including in this the decorations on the top of the arch and the urns on each side, because behind those we have some darker values not connected with the architecture at all, but with the trees in the distance. And they create this strong silhouette of the light balls on each end, the decorative round spheres, as well as the castellation on the top of the bridge and for the urns. So I want these things to come out. Now there is some decorative stonework that we can see that does also come across fairly strongly. So we want some indication of that. And then to a lesser degree, there is some indication of the brickwork also coming out, because there's some fairly dark lines, I think, where there's damp and maybe a bit of mould or moss between the coarse work. So that's not as strong as the decorative stonework around the arch and down the sides, but it's still there. The other thing that we get a sense of is the contrast between the spikiness of the foliage in the garden and the straight lines of the architecture. But also, with the grass in the foreground, we do have some nice straight lines with the grass and the pathway, but they're not as hard and as smooth and as straight, or as immediately kind of screaming at us, look at me, because they're softer values than the straight lines of the architecture, which are heightened by the dark contrast behind. So we want to convey those very important kind of sight lines with the grass and with the curving path on the other side, but not as strongly. It's a softer edge because it's grass for a start rather than concrete, and it's the little blades of grass are catching sunlight. It creates a softer line. So I want to have a softer line for that. So you can see what I'm doing now in my drawing. Let's just reflect what I've just said about visually what stands out with what I'm drawing and what I'm going to draw. So started on this central part. I've defined fairly well the architecture on the top of the bridge because I want to bring a dark value behind that in a moment. I'm now doing some of the decorative work of the stone, and I'm trying to not let it be too smooth, my line work. These are not they're not sharp-edged stones, although they're carefully made. They've been carefully made to have a rough textured outside. And so I want to kind of give a sense of that. And so you look at my lines and they're not even. I've got some lines that almost aren't there and others that are more there. I've got sometimes a little bit weight on the corner, so more ink has gone there to create the effect of a different depth or shape that casts a shadow in a stronger way, in a different way. And I'm still keeping most of these lines light because I can strengthen them later if I think strengthening is what they need. But because I'm drawing this directly in ink, I can't erase any ink, obviously, at the end. Every mark is going to be there. Now, you see me starting to work on these flowers, and these gardens, these plants, they're a part of the scene, but when we first look at this, they're a peripheral part of the scene, not just because they're actually on the sides, but because value-wise, they don't stand out so clearly from the value of a lot of the architecture, the stonework around them. And so it's more the spikiness of the silhouette. So I'm really only going to draw, mostly with these plants, a sense of silhouette. I'm not going to be trying to draw detail of the particular plants because that is going to put a lot of ink in a very small space, which will create a great sense of darkness, which isn't the darkest area of our scene. And it will also draw attention to something which isn't the main player. With a quick sketch, we want there to be a very obvious place for the eye to go where we focus the time and the ink that we have at our disposal for this particular scene. You can see again now on this side, I'm doing the same thing. Now, this drawing in real time, and you're watching this in real time, it took me less than 14 minutes to draw. So that, I think, is a good time for a quick sketch. And if I wasn't videoing this and being conscious that I didn't want it to be too loose, then I probably could have shaved a couple of minutes off that. Equally, I could have put a couple of more minutes into it at the end and just started to add a little more detail. But I did want to keep it loose and simple, and I did want to keep it an example of what we leave out, how we simplify things. Notice how I do these two urns. I found that for me personally, the most accurate way is to build up in terms of shapes. And sometimes I'll start in the center and work down and up, and sometimes I'll work at the top and work down, and sometimes at the bottom and work up. It depends how complex the urns are and what I think is going to work best. Sometimes I will do the same shape on each side or in each instant of the urn or whatever it is I'm drawing right along the line to help keep them looking the same. And you can see now doing this section through the archway. So we're, what are we? We're 9 minutes in. So we're about 3/4 of our time. There's a lot of paper still blank, which tells us I'm going to do a lot of line work very quickly. And that's what I'm doing now with the foliage behind. Foliage often is a trap when we're trying to draw quickly. It's easy to start to get bogged down in trying to draw leaves almost, or too much of a detailed leaf pattern, instead of just trying to capture the lights and darks that we see with perhaps a sense of the way the leaves look on their edging, on their silhouettes, where they stand out against the sky or against a much darker part of the plant. But you can see now how quickly I'm filling this in. And you'll also notice that I'm not making these trees, this foliage, equally dark. I'm darkening the parts nearest the bridge because that will help the architectural elements stand out. It'll make them pop more easily into our sight and our understanding as to what they are than the higher parts of the foliage. In fact, I don't even draw the further back, higher, taller trees in the background on the right-hand side because we have to work out what we're leaving out. And I felt that by capturing the stronger, darker values around the base, that I didn't need that other detail to have captured in the scene what I was wanting. We do have to be careful though, and I almost make this mistake here of not putting marks that start to look like scribble, because that will draw attention, but in a bad way. So I'm, in my mind, doing very loose hatching with a little less control, not a little less control, but a little less consistency than what I would normally do, because I'm making a deliberate choice in my speed here. But we do have to make sure that we don't start to put the lines on faster than we can still make them look like there is actually some plan in some design, that they're not just scribbling. Scribbling's great if we want a scribble effect, and that can help in some, that can be a great thing in some drawings, but not usually in mine, and certainly not in this one. But what I do want to do though is to very quickly create a fairly dark value, almost as if I was using a marker pen and putting black marker behind this to make it pop. But notice what I'm doing, what I talked about before. I'm not making it equally dark. I'm doing the darkest part behind the architecture and then letting it become lighter as it moves up, which is actually what happens in life, in our reference. If we look, that the top of the trees either capture a little bit of this weak sunlight through the clouds, or there is at least more light bouncing round higher up, and that creates a lighter value on the foliage. And I'm just doing this tree in the background, particularly because, again, it lets me create the silhouette edging that I want of the architecture, and a few little marks there just to emphasize the architecture again. So you can see now how quickly, in just a couple of minutes, by putting that foliage in, it really now starts to pop the stonework and the bridge. The other thing I'd like you to notice is how I've done the brickwork on those curved sections flanking the actual archway. In a very quick sketch, we have to make a choice whether we're going to ignore the detail such as the brickwork, or whether we're going to try and suggest it. What we don't want to do is to start to draw it in with any detail. The problem with ignoring it completely is we lose a sense of what the material is, and it could easily be a smooth cement rendered wall as old weathered brickwork. And I think that the weathering and the material is part of the story that I want to capture. But look how quickly I'm capturing it now. And I'm just doing some of that brickwork on the rest of the arch, trying to do it as lightly as I can with my 0.3 millimeter pen, Copic multi-liner. And I'm thinking, how's that looking? And I think we're pretty much done. What do you think? If you'd like to have a go drawing this, then you'll find the reference photo on my channel post page. There's a link in the description that will take you there. And please hit the like button for me and help my channel along. I hope this has helped you have some awareness of a strategy for simplification when we want to do a really quick sketch. We don't want to be erasing all the time. We want to sort of be able to get it right the first go and capture just the right amount of detail to capture the scene that we're looking at. But in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Bye.